Okay, today we're going to take a look at the GGHD. This is a conversion mod that basically converts your standard Game Gear motherboard into a HDMI capable device that allows you to play your Game Gear games on the big screen. So this is the device. It's a 3D printed affair. This unit's powered by USB-C. It's got HDMI output, which allows us to connect to modern day TVs. I've also added a audio jack, which allows me to listen to it on headphones or to connect to different types of TVs and stuff like that. But the first things first is we've got to make sure we've got a working Game Gear. So let's get this stripped down and get the process started. The Game Gear system was problematic, to say the least. We all know the capacitor problems and the various issues with the screen ribbons and the actual quality of the screen itself. Hence why I tend to modify the Game Gear by putting a new LCD screen in, putting modified lithium batteries in. A lot of products from Retro 6, which have I've been doing a lot with them recently, using a lot of their products on. They've just brought out some new audio board for the Game Gear, allowing it to be stereo compatible, which is quite nice. And then we're always modifying and bringing along new additions to the Game Gear. I do have quite a soft spot for the Game Gear. So in the background, what I'm doing here is I'm removing the caps and basically cleaning up the board, and then soldering in. I tend to use the ceramic caps from Retro 6. It's a nice cheap kit. It's all done for you, so I do tend to just cavitate to there rather than trying to source my own bits for this particular project. And they're not ripping you off, with that. So get these caps soldered on. So this is usually the main problem with the Game Gear. The caps leak. There was a design flaw, I think, in the original design, and as well, Sega never really anticipated these systems to still be being used 30-40 years down the line. So it's imperative, if you do own a Game Gear, obviously, or you've just bought one, is to get the caps replaced or do it yourself. It's not a particularly difficult job. You can use normal liquid capacitors, whether they're surface mount or through hole. A lot of people tend to use through hole. I like using ceramics because they're a bit more future proof, I think, and they just give a neater job. And they're neater in the actual motherboard, so that if you do want to do a modification or anything like that, they don't take up as much room as the other types. They can be a little bit more fiddly to install, just because of their size. You haven't got the legs like a through hole, which probably makes the sense why people tend to go for the through hole, because it's probably a bit easier to hold on to. These can be a little bit more fiddly. As long as you take your time, you should be fine. First things first, when you're doing this mod, if you do happen to come across one, is to, again, replace the capacitors, clean up all the board, get rid of all the old capacitor juice and all the corrosive properties of that. So this is me just going over with some IPA after I've done the recap, just to get everything off, and then we're going to do a test on the Game Gear to make sure it still functions, because this Game Gear didn't function when I got it. I was quite lucky. I did buy 4 Game Gears for not a lot of money, actually, about £100, which isn't a lot of money really, because they tend to go not working for probably about £40 each in the UK. So just inspecting my work here, just to make sure I've not missed anything, or there's no solder blobs or anything that's going to affect me powering this unit up. So what I'm going to be using now is what's known as a clean juice from Retro 6. It's a USB charging board, or USB-C charging board, with 2 lithium batteries that go in the original compartments on the Game Gear. So we're going to get this plumbed in, and we're going to power up this Game Gear just to make sure it all works. Obviously the last thing you want to do is do this modification, then find that the Game Gear doesn't power up. It is when you power up an original Game Gear that you look at the original screen. Obviously I'm old enough to know what it was like when it originally came out, and it was breathtaking when it came out, because all we'd got to really compare it to was the Game Boy, which obviously, just a monochromatic screen, nothing colour or anything like that, so it was really, really cool. The Lynx came along, but it didn't come with it. The games that come with it weren't known enough. I don't think it had the software catalogue to really give a good punch and a really good impression. I think that's one of the reasons why that particularly failed whereas Sega obviously carried with it Sega, Sonic the Hedgehog and stuff like that, Shinobi, Streets of Rage, and all these classics. So I think that's one of the reasons why, for me, the Game Gear still holds a really soft spot in my heart, and why I tend to still enjoy working on them. So we confirmed that the Game Gear still works. We've now got to prepare it for the HDMI board on the mod to go in. So there's a number of components that need to be removed. They are all available in the instructions, which are available online at GameBox Systems, but it's basically removing some of the high voltage components that powered the original fluorescent screen. These components include a couple of capacitors, a couple of inductors, and the main tube itself, obviously, because that's where the board's going to go. So obviously the tube is the white strip right in the middle. If you're not familiar with that, that's what generates the backlight. Obviously nowadays we use LCDs and LEDs and OLEDs and stuff like that. So there's the components there that I've removed. Some of them are removed purely to keep the board flat as possible. So we're just removing those few last bits and bobs. You can remove the wires that run it, because the board does power from the new modification, so you don't actually need the power board or the audio board. These are the video signal lines. There are some little resistors there, very low ohmic resistors, which are used just to buffer the signal. They need to be removed and bridged, just to allow the pure signal from the two ASICs that are on this particular board to deliver their signal direct to this board. This is a bit tricky. We need to align the cartridge slot. That's basically where this new board fetches its power from. So we just need to make sure that we've got the boards married together as flat as possible, so not to bend or create any stress to the boards. We need to get it perfectly aligned, because at the end of the board, on this edge connector, we need to connect, basically that's the LCD ribbon connection, and we need to make some signals, take some signals off from there into the Game Gear HD motherboard. So basically there's like a half a via which is on the end of the board, and we just need to connect and just bridge that to the pin. Quite delicate. You do need to be very steady-handed to do this, just so you don't bridge the connections, and be very, very gentle. So you saw there I just bridged that connection, but just with a little bit of care and attention, you can just put enough solder on just to bridge that connector. This is one of the most crucial parts of the mod, because obviously if you bridge any of these connectors, you're going to get no video output, and there's a chance that you could damage the board by shorting it out. There are other places that you can take the signals from, but obviously this is where the original board was designed to take. Sometimes if you're not particularly careful, you can lift the pads on this edge connector. But I've been lucky enough on this one that everything's all okay, and I managed to get that all soldered in. There's a few little points on the cartridge connector that need to be soldered. Again, these are for power and earth to power the board. So again, the instructions tell you which ones to. You could populate them all if you wanted to, but there's no need. There's only 4 or 5 connections that need to be made. So I'm just counting here just to make sure I've got the right pins. Everything's all in the right place. So just nicely heat the large via that's over the top of the post from the cartridge port. Make sure it soaks right through to the actual cartridge port, which is underneath it. So I'm just checking with the instructions just that I've got the right ones in place. Give it a nice good soaking, let that solder creep all the way through to the connection underneath. And there we have it. The board's nicely flat, which is exactly what I wanted. The connections are nice, it's all been all married up lovely, so far so good, everything's all going according to plan so far. Next thing we're going to do, we've got to start to connect the joypad connections, because this doesn't use, obviously there's no buttons on this unit like the original Game Gear, So what we've got to do is take off the test points, we've got to take some connections over just to basically allow this new board to control the original Game Gear board. So just marrying over some little test points rather than connecting direct to the actual pads where they've chosen to obviously go from the test points, which should be in very good condition. You never know what the original pad connections are actually like, so I can see why they've chose to use the test point connections, because you know they are all going to be good and they're all nicely gold plated. So we'll just get these plumbed in. Nothing really particularly difficult here, just following the instructions on off screen. Just want to keep all the wires nice and flat and as arranged well as possible. I think this particular part of the process could be done by anybody. It's not particularly difficult. The only part I did find probably could pose some people some problems is that edge connector. But again, if you've got a magnifying glass or something nice that you can zoom in on, it's not particularly tricky. Giving it a nice clean up, get rid of all the residue. I do find the Game Gear board to be particularly dirty, so it does tend to want a good clean. This is a clock takeoff. This is the clock from the Game Gear to the board, so that the clocks marry up between the two. Here's some of the other components in the bag. We've got a ribbon cable to connect this little daughter board for where the actual controller goes in. The controller to be used is basically a standard Mega Drive controller, Genesis controller. They advise you to take this metal shroud off that goes on the end of it. I didn't particularly take to that idea. I thought you might damage some of the pins, so what I went to do on my own is I found some screws that matched the thread, and I used those to screw the metal protective cage around that port back on. And I realised, and obviously fitting it back to the Game Gear, I realised that it didn't cause any. There was enough room for it to go in. It didn't cause any problems with me fitting this board back into the Game Gear. There is a known issue with this daughter board. There was an error in its construction. I did find this, that when I put it together, the controller didn't work. There was a trace that needed to be cut on that little daughter board, which I carried out, so that's all good. So that's the nuts and bolts of the conversion done. So now we've basically got to marry it up into the case. This is the bottom half of the case. Always remember, that's the little on-off button. I can't believe the amount of times I forgot to put that in. It's not a particularly great. I thought personally I would have gone for a different option on this start board, but you know, okay, I didn't make it, so I'll just go with the flow. Have to be careful to not trap that little ribbon cable in. I weren't quite sure really. The instructions do show what to do. I weren't really sure. I just tucked it in basically as best I could. I didn't want to trap it or anything like that. It's a little bit fiddly just to get the gist of things and get this married up. I decided not to take off the cables purely and simply because I couldn't be bothered. The Game Gear, one thing I have missed off this, the Game Gear link cable, the metal shroud, there's two little sticking out parts, little metal tabs that stick out that needed to be bent flat again. I forgot to mention that bit, so just in case you are following this tutorial, obviously you need to do that as it won't fit in the case. Some nice machine screws there. They were that's quite a nice touch. You're not just screwing into the 3D printed plastic, so there's some that has proved quite invaluable to me, because I've had this board doing troubleshooting and bits and bobs out, had this board in and out quite a few times trying to find out what's wrong with the joystick port not working. So then there's this intermediate little section that just builds some height, and this is the top. I 3D printed the top again. There was a defect on the top, so these little machine inserts need to be put in. So I got some of these off eBay, and basically just this first time I've ever done this, so I thought I did quite well on this particular part. So basically just pop the end in a soldering iron, set it to 350 degrees. and just basically pop the soldering iron in the end of the threaded insert. Just trying to get a decent camera angle for you. And basically hold it parallel and then heat up the insert. Because it's brass, it absorbs heat very quickly and then just melts into the 3D print, and then just got to be careful not to go too far. So I'm really pleased with the results of that. I think that's gone quite well, and quite easy really. I was quite impressed how well that went in. Like I say, the original unit did come with a 3D printed case, but it wasn't particularly... There was quite a few defects on the print, so I decided to have a go myself. So this is the resulting print that I've got. It took me a few goes. This is the original print that's being shown on this particular video. As you can see, just by the cartridge port, there is a little defect. This is quite interesting. I decided to keep the original back, even though it had got some scratches on it, just purely and simply because of that GameBox logo that was in there. There's a few scratches on it. I think they should have put a protective film on it when they brought it, but hey ho. I've since 3D printed some little feet just to stand that away. So that's the finished article with my newly printed 3D top, and I've got a rum cart in here if I can ever drive. So we're going to see the results of this. I've been very impressed with the output from this. The screen image is absolutely brilliant. There's no noise. There's some nice options there if you want to add, your normal scan lines and bits and bobs. Really impressed with the image of that. I know that there are other mods, other screen mods on the market, from Retro 6 and McWill and stuff like that, where you could add a VGA output. But this is obviously very, very convenient because it's HDMI, and it produces a lovely, crisp, nice, colourful image. So this is just going to show a few little bits of gameplay with this running. I've been really impressed. I think it was well worth it. It's a different take. I have quite a few Game Gears that obviously I've LCD modded. It seems to be a bit of a thing for me. I quite enjoy working on them. I don't sell them. I've just kept them all to myself, and I've brought different cases and quite enjoy looking at all the different models that I've created. But this is quite a different take, and that's one of the reasons why I was so interested in it. It's just nice to be able to sit back and not squint and look at a small screen. It's nice to see this on a big screen, and the opportunity to save another Game Gear but in a slightly different way. So as you can see, it's really nicely reproduced. I'm very impressed with the image quality and the colour reproduction. You do find quite a lot of the time that a lot of these devices change the image very slightly, and it either looks washed out or the colours aren't reproduced correctly. But it's obviously took a lot of time in reproducing this and getting this right, so it's really nice. There's no lag. I think it plays really brilliantly. So it looks like I'm going to be having quite a few sessions on this, just to play the Game Gear in a slightly different way, which is really, really nice. GameBox do a lot of other systems. I have got a Game Boy SP HD to go through next, so I did buy quite a few of their products. The first one I bought was the 64 HD, which obviously I did a video on before, where I was changing the output from the N64, and I've been very, very pleased. They produced, they sold a very nice low-cost HDMI version. This is the menu screen that allows you to increase and scale in different ways and different resolutions. Allows you to put scan lines on it and grids. So there's quite a few options if you're into that. Personally, I just like a nice clean image that I can play on a larger screen. I don't think you don't really want to put it on a massively large screen, because I just don't think the Game Gear translates well to say a 40-50 inch LCD, or some of the modern OLEDs or something like that. I don't think it would play very good on those. But this is for a normal sized TV in your game room. This would work out really well. I've been really impressed with how the games actually play on that big screen. It offers a new dimension. That's something that I never really would have done with the original Game Gear. Its form factor's nice. I like the colours on the top to show the original Game Gear colours that are obviously been reproduced on the top are a really cool feature. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now. I'm really pleased with it. It's very clean, it's very nice, there's no noise. I think it's very, very well done. I'm really impressed by the image quality. It's been in the pipework for quite a while. I don't think it's available anymore, looking at what's happened around the business model and the owners and engineers. I think there's been some problems with death recently with one of the lead engineers with it, so my condolences there. It's a great project, and I've bought quite a few products from GameBox, so it'll be dearly missed. And I really enjoyed talking to the postman when we were going through initially looking at this project. So it's a difficult one to go ahead with this project, but I think it needed to be done. I think the legacy of the GameBox systems and this particular project, I think it was a troubled project, just because of, not because of the way it was designed. I think it's just because of the nature